Have you ever spent an entire morning perfectly casting every beautiful piece of timber, every rocky point, and every boat dock on the lake, only to go home with a skunk in the live well? You did everything right, exactly like the old-timers taught you. But what if I told you that while you were painfully picking apart that shoreline, the biggest fish in the lake was floating right under your boat, laughing at you? Welcome to the biggest trap in modern fishing. Today, we are talking about why you are trying so hard to find structure that you are completely ignoring giant fish, suspended in what everyone calls dead water. I promise you, by the end of this video, you will look at a completely empty, featureless expanse of water in a brand new way. You're going to discover a truth that the tournament pros know, but most weekend warriors completely miss. It is going to change where you cast, how you think, and most importantly, the size of the fish you catch. So, here is a question for you to answer in the comments right now. Do you honestly feel anxious when you have to cast into the middle of the lake with nothing to aim at? Let us talk about it. Let us get some context on why this happens to almost every single angler out there. Since the very first time you picked up a fishing rod, someone probably told you to cast at something. Aim for that lily pad, cast past that stump, drop your worm right next to that concrete pilling. It is ingrained in our brains that fish need physical cover to survive. And sure, for little fish that is absolutely true. They need places to hide so they do not get eaten. Because of this, generations of fishermen have been programmed to hug the shoreline, staring intensely at the banks, entirely convinced that if there is no wood or rock, there are no fish. We do it for years, decades even, driving our boats over hundreds of acres of open water just to get to a single fallen tree. We label that massive expanse of open water as dead water. We assume it is just a barren desert where nothing happens. But this belief is exactly why so many people plateau in their fishing skills. They rely on the comfort of visual targets, ignoring the fact that the true apex predators of any lake do not play by the rules of the shoreline. Imagine this scenario for a second. It is early morning on the lake. The water is perfectly slick. There's a light mist rolling off the surface and everything is completely quiet. You pull up to a beautiful stretch of bank lined with flooded bushes and fallen timber. You make your first cast, fully expecting the rod to get ripped out of your hands. You work that bait perfectly. You bump the wood, you pause, you twitch. Nothing. You move to the next stump and the next. Hours go by. You are doing exactly what you have always done, but the fish simply are not there. What you do not realize is that 200 yards behind your boat, out in the middle of absolutely nowhere, a massive school of baitfish is getting absolutely terrorized by a pack of giant suspended fish. While you are beating the bank to death looking for a 2-pounder hiding in the shade, the real monsters are roaming the open water like a pack of wolves. This is the reality of modern fishing that so many people fail to grasp. We get so tunnel-visioned on the visible structure that we become blind to the ecosystem happening right behind our backs. The biggest mistake you can make is assuming that a lack of physical cover means a lack of life. Dead water is rarely actually dead. Let us break down what people actually mean when they say dead water. Usually, they are talking about a large, featureless basin. No humps, no drop-offs, no brush piles, just 40, 50 or 60 feet of water with a completely flat bottom. To the naked eye, and even to a traditional old-school sonar looking only at the bottom, it looks like a desert. But you have to stop thinking about a lake as a 2-dimensional map and start thinking about it in 3 dimensions. The bottom is only one part of the equation. The entire water column above it, from the surface down to the mud, is a massive playground. When you call it dead water, you are only looking at the floor. But what about the middle floor? What about the penthouse? Suspended fish do not care about the bottom. They are utilizing the vast emptiness of the middle water column because it offers them advantages that the shoreline simply cannot provide. They have limitless room to maneuver, they have clear sightlines to hunt, and they are completely unbothered by the countless fishermen beating the banks. The term dead water is just a myth invented by anglers who do not know how to fish without a visual target. You have to understand the psychology and biology of a giant apex predator. Think about the biggest bass, walleye, or whatever species you are chasing. Once a fish reaches a certain size, It no longer has any natural predators in that lake. A 10-pound bass does not need to hide in a brush pile to keep from getting eaten by a bird or a bigger fish. It is the boss. It does whatever it wants. And what it wants is the maximum amount of food for the minimum amount of effort. Hiding in a bush waiting for a single bluegill to swim by is terribly inefficient for a giant fish. Instead, these big fish move out to the open water, where the massive schools of high-protein baitfish live. They do not need a physical hiding spot because their size is their protection. They suspend in the abyss, totally relaxed, just waiting for the perfect moment to gorge themselves on an entire school of shad or herring. When you understand that big fish are lazy, confident, and driven entirely by their stomachs, you realize that the open, structureless water is actually the most logical place for them to live. They outgrow the bank, and if you want to catch them, you have to outgrow the bank too. The entire key to unlocking suspended fish in dead water comes down to one single word: bait. If you find the bait, you find the big fish. It really is that simple. In most lakes, the primary forage base, things like shad, alewives, or herring, are pelagic. That means they live their entire lives roaming the open water. They do not care about rocks or logs. They follow the plankton, they follow the wind, and they follow the water temperature. And guess who follows them? The giant fish you are trying to catch. Picture a massive bait ball moving slowly across a totally featureless basin. That bait ball is the structure. It is a living, moving piece of cover. The big predators will follow that school of bait for miles, hovering just below them, completely suspended in the middle of the water column. If you are casting at a rock pile on the shore, but the bait is roaming a half-mile out in the dead water, you are literally fishing in an empty swimming pool. You have to break the habit of looking for permanent structures and start hunting for the temporary moving structures created by millions of tiny bait fish. One of the hardest things for a veteran angler to accept is that the grandfather rule of fishing is outdated. Your grandfather taught you to fish the shoreline because 50 years ago that was all they had. They did not have the technology to see what was happening in the middle of the lake, so they fished the things they could see with their own two eyes: trees, rocks, docks, and weed lines. It was a logical approach for the time, but relying on that old wisdom today is like using a rotary phone to send a text message. The introduction of modern electronics, especially forward-facing sonar, has completely shattered the illusion that all the fish are on the bank. When anglers first turned on these new screens and pointed them out into the middle of nowhere, they were shocked. There were thousands of fish out there, huge ones, just hanging out in the middle of the water column. The old rule of structure equals fish was proven to be only a half-truth. Yes, there are fish in the structure, but the true giants, the ones that win tournaments and break records, are very often out in the open, completely ignoring everything your grandfather told you to cast at. Let us talk about the attitude of a suspended fish. There is an old myth in the fishing community that suspended fish are impossible to catch. People say they are inactive, they are in a neutral mood, and they will not bite. That is absolutely false. The truth is, suspended fish are often the most actively feeding fish in the entire lake. When a fish is suspended mid-water, it has a 360-degree view of its surroundings. It is scanning the surface, the sides, and the water below. It is in a predatory posture. Think about a hunter sitting in a tree stand overlooking an open field. They are not resting, they are waiting. When you drop a bait in front of a suspended fish in open water, there is no distracting clutter. There are no branches, no weeds, no rocks. The fish sees your bait perfectly isolated against the vastness of the water. If you present it correctly, making it look like a lonely injured bait fish that has separated from the school, that suspended giant will absolutely destroy it. They are not impossible to catch. You just have to stop dragging your baits on the bottom and start putting them right in the fish's face. Let us put ourselves in a very specific real-world scenario. You are idling your boat across a massive deep bay. The water is 80 feet deep. Your traditional sonar shows a completely flat muddy bottom. It looks boring. But halfway down the screen, at exactly 40 feet deep, you see a massive thick arch. That is a solitary giant fish suspended perfectly halfway between the surface and the bottom. There is no structure within a half mile. Why is he there? He is perfectly balanced in his preferred water temperature, completely safe from the sun, and sitting just below the layer where the bait fish travel. If you try to fish him by dragging a worm on the bottom, you are 40 feet below him. He will never even know your bait exists. If you throw a topwater lure, you are 40 feet above him. You might as well be fishing on the moon. This is where the magic of targeting suspended fish happens. You have to use a presentation that counts down exactly to that 40-foot mark and stays in his strike zone. When you finally figure out how to suspend a bait right on the nose of a fish hovering over 80 feet of water, it feels like an absolute superpower. There is a massive psychological barrier that you have to overcome to fish dead water effectively. I call it the fear of the void. When you're standing on the front deck of a boat and you look out over a mile of open water, it feels incredibly intimidating. Your brain is screaming at you to find a target. You want to cast at something you can see. Casting into the open abyss feels like a waste of time. It feels random. It feels like you are just throwing a piece of plastic into the ocean and hoping for a miracle. To conquer this fear, you have to learn to trust your instruments and trust the science. You have to stop fishing with your eyes and start fishing with your mind. You need to visualize the water column. Understand that even though the surface looks like a flat pane of glass, underneath there are currents, temperature breaks, and highways of baitfish moving around. Once you catch your first giant fish out of what looks like absolutely nothing, that psychological barrier shatters. Suddenly, the open water does not look empty anymore. It looks like a canvas of endless possibilities, and the shoreline starts to look like a crowded, overworked trap. Let us talk about the invisible structure that exists in open water. Just because you cannot see a physical log or a rock does not mean there is no structure. In the dead water, structure is made of water itself. The most important invisible structure is the thermocline. In the warmer months, the lake stratifies into different temperature layers. There is a hot layer on top, a freezing cold layer on the bottom, and a narrow band in the middle where the temperature rapidly changes. That middle band is the thermocline. To a fish, that temperature break feels like a physical ceiling and floor. It holds the most comfortable water and the highest levels of oxygen. Baitfish will stack up along the thermocline like cars on a highway, and the giant predators will suspend right there with them. If you can locate the thermocline on your sonar, you have found the structure. You can literally troll or cast along an invisible wall in the middle of a 100-foot deep basin and catch fish after fish. If you ignore the thermocline and only look for physical wood and rocks, you are missing the most important holding area in the entire lake during the summer. Choosing the right lure for suspended fish in dead water requires a total shift in your tackle box. When you are fishing the bank, you use jigs to punch through weeds or square bill crankbaits to bounce off rocks. But in open water, you do not have to worry about getting snagged. This opens up entirely new presentation styles. The absolute best tools for giant suspended fish are big swim baits and glide baits. These lures are designed to draw fish from long distances. When a massive glide bait sweeps side to side in the open water, it moves a ton of water and flashes in the sunlight. Because there is no cover to block the fish's vision, a suspended predator can see that bait from 30 or 40 feet away. They will slowly rise from the depths, track that bait for a long distance and absolutely crush it. You need lures that look incredibly realistic because the fish has plenty of time to inspect it in the clear open water. Soft plastic swim baits with a heavy belly weight are perfect because you can count them down to the exact depth of the fish and reel them slowly through the strike zone. Sometimes the horizontal approach is not enough, and you have to go vertical. Imagine you are staring at your electronics, and you see a huge mark suspended 20 feet down in 50 feet of water. He is not moving. He is just hanging there, lethargic. You could cast a swim bait at him, but he might not want to chase it. This is when you drop right on his head. Vertical fishing in open water is a deadly art form. You take a heavy jigging spoon, a drop shot rig, or a balance jig, and you drop it straight down next to the transducer. You watch your bait fall on the screen in real time. You stop it exactly 2 feet above the fish. Remember, always stay above them. Predators look up, they rarely look down. You hold the bait dead still in the water column. It takes incredible boat control and a steady hand. You watch the fish on the screen slowly tilt its head up. It slowly rises to your bait. You feel a tiny tick on your line, you set the hook, and all hell breaks loose. There is nothing more interactive and heart-pounding than watching a suspended giant eat your bait right under the boat. We need to talk about boat control because out in the dead water, there are no trees to tie up to, and there is no bank to block the wind. When you are fishing a shoreline, it is easy to keep your position. But when you are floating in the middle of a vast basin, the wind and the waves become your biggest challenge. Suspended fish are very sensitive to unnatural movements. If your boat is constantly spinning around, or you are heavy on the trolling motor making a ton of noise, you will spook fish that are 30 feet below you. The shadow of your hull can also push fish away in clear water. To effectively fish the abyss, you have to learn to use the wind to your advantage. You set up a controlled drift. You figure out which way the wind is pushing the surface water, because that surface current is what dictates the movement of the baitfish. You stay off the trolling motor as much as possible, remaining stealthy. You make long, sweeping casts ahead of the drift, letting your bait fall naturally through the water column. Mastering boat control in open water separates the amateurs from the absolute pros. One of the greatest benefits of fishing suspended fish in open water is the lack of competition. Think about a typical Saturday morning on your favorite local lake. Every single visible point, every laydown, and every boat dock has a boat sitting on it. Anglers are leapfrogging each other down the shoreline, throwing the exact same baits at the exact same shallow targets. Those bank fish are highly pressured. They have seen 50 spinnerbaits before noon. But out in the dead water, there is nobody. You have the entire middle of the lake to yourself. The fish out there are unpressured. They are completely relaxed and they are much more willing to eat. You can spend an entire day graphing and fishing without ever hearing another trolling motor or dealing with the wake of another fishing boat. It is peaceful, it is highly strategic, and it gives you access to a population of fish that literally never see a lure. While everyone else is fighting over the scraps on the shoreline, you are dining at a private buffet out in the open ocean. That alone is a reason to abandon the bank. Let us address the myth of the bite window. Every fisherman has heard that you have to be on the water at the crack of dawn, or you have to fish the last hour of daylight. People believe that during the middle of the day, when the sun is high and hot, the fish go deep into the thickest cover and refuse to eat. That might be true for shallow water fish, but suspended giants operate on a completely different schedule. In the dead water, the bite windows are entirely dictated by the movement of the bait fish and the wind. A giant suspended fish might decide to feed aggressively at exactly 1:00 in the afternoon on a bright sunny day, simply because the wind picked up and pushed a school of bait into a vulnerability. Because they are in deep, open water, the harsh sunlight does not bother them. They are comfortably sitting in the cooler depths. This means if you understand how to fish the dead water, you can catch trophy fish all day long, completely ignoring the traditional sunrise and sunset rules. You dictate the action, not the clock. It is time for a reality check about patience. Leaving the bank to hunt suspended fish is not for the faint of heart. It requires a tremendous amount of discipline. When you fish the shoreline, you get constant feedback. You get bites from small fish, you get snagged on rocks, you feel your bait hitting wood. It keeps your mind occupied. In the open water, you get none of that. You might cast a heavy swim bait out into the abyss for 3 straight hours without a single bump. Your mind will play tricks on you. You will doubt yourself. You will feel a powerful urge to turn the trolling motor on high and run back to the nearest boat dock just to catch a 1-pounder and break the skunk. You have to fight that urge. Hunting suspended fish is a game of quality over quantity. You are not out there to catch 20 little fish. You are out there for 1, maybe 2 bites all day. But when that bite happens, when a 7-pound giant violently stops your bait in the middle of nowhere, it instantly erases hours of boredom. You have to trust the process and stay committed to the deep water. Let us talk about the pure violence of an open water strike. When you hook a big fish in heavy cover, the fight is chaotic and messy. They wrap you around a log, they bury themselves in thick grass, and a lot of times you lose them because the line breaks against the structure. You are fighting the environment just as much as you are fighting the fish. But when you hook a suspended monster in 50 feet of completely open water, it is a totally different experience. There is no wood to cut your line. There are no weeds to foul your hooks. It is just you, the rod, and pure raw pulling power. Because the fish has nowhere to hide, they fight incredibly hard. They will take massive drag-peeling runs straight down. They will surge towards the surface and launch themselves entirely out of the water. It is a clean, fair, and epic battle. You do not have to winch them in with heavy braid and stiff rods. You can fight them with finesse, using the drag of your reel, and truly enjoy the experience of battling a giant fish without the constant panic of them wrapping you around a stump. Seasonality plays a massive role in why dead water is so productive. In the spring, yes, almost all fish push shallow to spawn. That is when beating the bank works beautifully. But once the spawn is over, the dynamics of the lake completely flip. During the heat of the late summer, the shallow water becomes too hot and oxygen depleted for the biggest fish. And during the freezing cold of winter, the shallows are too unstable. During these extreme seasons, the giant predators evacuate the shoreline. They migrate out to the deep basins, finding stable temperatures and following the huge schools of bait that also seek out the deeper water. If you stubbornly refuse to leave the bank during August or December, you are fishing for a tiny fraction of the fish population. The true giants, the ones that have lived through a dozen seasons, know exactly where to go. They move out into the open void and suspend. If you learn to track them during these post-spawn and extreme weather months, you can turn the toughest times of the year into the most productive days of your fishing season. You need to change the way you look at your sonar screen. Most anglers use their electronics like a depth finder. They just want to know how deep the bottom is, and they look for little bumps on the bottom line. If you want to master dead water, you have to retrain your eyes. Ignore the bottom line. The bottom is irrelevant right now. Focus entirely on the massive empty space between the 0-foot mark at the top of the screen and the bottom line. That is the middle column. Adjust the sensitivity on your unit so you can see the thermocline and the subtle interference of bait schools. Look for those thick, heavy arches floating randomly in the middle of the screen. Often, a really big suspended fish will not even look like an arch. It will just look like a solid, glowing blob. That is a fish that is barely moving, just hovering in place. When you train your brain to scan the middle of the water column instead of just staring at the floor, the so-called dead water suddenly reveals itself to be absolutely packed with life. There is a psychological shift that happens to a fisherman when they finally conquer open water. At first, it is a terrifying experiment, but once you start consistently pulling giant fish out of what looks like an empty bathtub, you become ruined in the best way possible. You will drive past miles of perfect-looking shoreline, beautiful fallen trees, and gorgeous lily pad fields, and you will not even be tempted to make a cast. You will look at the other boats stacked up on the bank, beating the water to a froth, and you will just smile and keep driving towards the deep basin. It completely frees you from the crowded, predictable patterns that everyone else is stuck in. You become an open water hunter. You start thinking about wind currents, barometric pressure, and bait migrations instead of just looking for a good-looking rock. It is an evolution in your angling journey. You graduate from casting at targets to hunting an ecosystem. It takes time, it takes patience, and it takes a lot of empty casts, but the reward is catching the caliber of fish that you used to only read about in magazines. So how do you actually make this transition? You do not have to quit fishing the bank cold turkey. That is a recipe for frustration. Instead, make a deal with yourself on your next trip. Dedicate just 1 hour right in the middle of the day to strictly fishing the dead water. Put away your shallow crankbaits and your flipping jigs. Tie on a heavy swimbait or a drop shot. Idle your boat out to the deepest, most featureless part of the lake. Watch your electronics, look for baitfish, and force yourself to make long casts into the middle of nothing. Commit to that single hour. Do it every time you go out. Eventually, during one of those hours, your line will jump, your rod will bend in half, and you will drag a true lake monster up from the depths. At that exact moment, the light bulb will go off in your head. You will realize that everything you thought you knew about where fish live was only half the story. You will finally understand the secret of the suspended giant, and your fishing life will never be the same. Let us wrap this up and bring it all together. The harsh truth is that if you are only fishing physical structure on the shoreline, you are leaving the biggest, most aggressive fish in the lake completely untouched. We have been brainwashed to think that no structure means no fish, but the reality, the real plot twist here, is that the massive, featureless expanses of dead water are exactly where the true apex predators live. They are out there following pelagic baitfish, riding the invisible structure of the thermocline, and using the vast open water to hunt without limits. When you finally break the habit of beating the bank and learn to cast into the void with a swim bait or a vertical presentation, you completely change your potential as an angler. You stop competing with 50 other boats on the shore and start hunting untouched giants in the middle of the lake. I want to thank you for watching, and I hope this video challenges you to step out of your comfort zone on your next trip. Now I need you to hit that subscribe button, smash the like button, and head down to the comments. Tell me honestly, are you going to try fishing the dead water on your next trip? Or are you still too addicted to the shoreline? Let us debate it down below, and I will see you out on the water.